Welcome to Amazing Stories. Have you ever wondered what would have happened if the United States hadn't decided to drop the two atomic bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Were they really needed to end the war, or did their use serve other interests? On July 16, 1945, the Jornada del Muerto desert in New Mexico witnessed the Trinity test, the first atomic bomb detonation. The Manhattan Project had successfully finished. The Americans had won the race to develop the ultimate weapon. Now they had the power to wipe their enemies off the map, the Japanese, since Germany had surrendered 2 months earlier. However, the first excitement over the technological success quickly turned into deep worry. The tough question that had been there since the project started became real and urgent. How should they use this new and terrifying weapon? Should they attack Japanese cities with it as soon as possible? Or would it be enough to show its power to the world, maybe with a high-altitude explosion, so the Japanese would surrender without having to kill thousands of people? The day after the successful Trinity test, the brilliant physicist and biologist Leo Szilard, who a decade earlier had thought up and patented the idea of a nuclear chain reaction, wrote a petition to the President of the United States, Harry S. Truman. In that document, signed by 70 Manhattan Project scientists, they asked the President to send an ultimatum to Japan with the surrender terms the Allies wanted. This would allow Japan to accept or reject them before the United States used atomic bombs against the country. Truman was also reminded that the original goal of the Manhattan Project had been to defend the United States from a possible nuclear attack from Germany, an enemy that had already surrendered. That petition contained a clear warning. The awesome power this weapon gives the United States comes with a duty to be careful, and if we don't live up to that duty, our moral standing will be weakened in the eyes of the world and our own. It would then be harder for us to live up to our responsibility to control the destructive forces we've unleashed. However, the scientific director of the Manhattan Project, Robert Oppenheimer, did not sign that petition. In his opinion, it was best to leave the decision about using the atomic bomb to the politicians in Washington, because the scientists didn't know all the information about the conflict and Japan's possible reactions. Anyway, Szilard's petition never reached Truman's chain of command. Szilard made the mistake of giving it to James F. Burns, who would soon become Secretary of State and was a strong supporter of using the bomb against the Japanese. Burns did not give the petition to the President. The only result of Szilard's effort was that General Leslie Groves, the military and security director of the Manhattan Project, ordered an investigation into the scientist looking for evidence of illegal behavior to prosecute him. The Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, put together a temporary committee of 8 people to give advice to the President about using the atomic bomb. This committee, in turn, asked a small group of important scientists from the Manhattan Project, including Oppenheimer, to share their thoughts. The report from those scientists, given on June 16th, said that their colleagues didn't all agree on whether to use these weapons first. Some who wanted only a technical show of power wished to ban atomic weapons and worried that using them then would hurt America's standing in future talks. Others, however, pointed out that using the military right away could save American lives and believed it would improve international relations, caring more about preventing war than getting rid of this specific weapon. The scientists who wrote the report leaned more towards these latter opinions. They couldn't suggest any technical demonstration that would end the war, and they didn't see any good alternative to direct military use. After reading that report, on June 21st, the interim committee wrote its final suggestion for the President. The suggestion was to use the weapon against Japan as soon as possible, without warning, and against a dual target, meaning a military base or war factory surrounded by or next to homes or other buildings that would likely be damaged. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 2/3 of what was, just seconds before, home to 255,000 people, turned into a burnt wasteland, covered in charred and smoking remains, ruins and fires. In one go, about 70,000 people died, many literally melted by the extremely high temperatures. Tens of thousands more would die in the following days, weeks and months from burns, injuries or illnesses caused by something almost everyone didn't know about: radiation. By the end of 1945, the death toll reached 140,000, and it would keep growing for decades. 3 days later, the United States dropped another bomb on Nagasaki. More than 200,000 people lost their lives. Civilians, the vast majority. 6 days later, the Empire of Japan announced its unconditional surrender. Chapter 5. Reflections after the bombing and Carl Compton's role. One of the 8 members of that interim committee, called together by Secretary of War Stimson to advise President Truman on using the atomic bomb, was the well-known physicist Carl Taylor Compton, who was the president of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. A year later, in the December 1946 issue of The Atlantic magazine, Compton wrote an interesting article where he explained the reasons that led them to suggest the nuclear bombing. It's easy now, after it happened, to look back and say that Japan was already a defeated nation, Compton said, and to wonder why the atomic bomb was used to kill so many thousands of helpless Japanese in such an inhumane way. Compton shared his experience, which gave him a great chance to learn the important facts from different angles. He wasn't in charge of any of the decisions, which meant he could speak freely without having to defend himself. Even though his part in making the atomic bomb was very small, he was part of the group that Secretary of War Stimson brought together to help with plans for its testing, use, and what to do with it afterward. Then, just before Hiroshima, he was sent to General MacArthur in Manila and spent 2 months with his staff. He learned about the invasion plans and how strongly these officers believed that a tough and costly fight was still ahead. Finally, he spent the first month after Victory Day in Japan, where he could see firsthand the physical and mental state of that country. He also talked with scientist friends and people he had known his whole life. With this experience, Compton truly believed that using the atomic bomb saved hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of lives, both American and Japanese. He argued that without its use, the war would have gone on for many more months, and that no one, knowing what was coming and what the atomic bomb could do, like Secretary Stimson and the chiefs of staff, could have made a different choice. One thing that's often forgotten when talking about the atomic attack on Hiroshima and Nagasaki is that Americans weren't the only ones who thought it was necessary. The British also supported it. During a meeting of the Combined Policy Committee held in Washington on July 4, 1945, a month before the bombings, representatives from the UK government showed their support for the United States using atomic bombs against Japan. The Potsdam Ultimatum and Japanese resistance. But was it really like that? Was the only way to avoid a bloody ground invasion of the Japanese islands to kill tens of thousands of civilians? Did the Allies even bother to send an ultimatum to Japan? Did they give them a chance to surrender? This is another controversial point in history, because on July 26, 1945, 2 weeks before the bombing of Hiroshima, Harry Truman, Winston Churchill, and the President of China, Chiang Kai-shek, issued the Potsdam Declaration. This document outlined the terms of surrender for the Empire of Japan that had been agreed upon by the Allies and threatened Japan with prompt and utter destruction if they did not surrender. Was it an ultimatum? Yes, but the threat didn't have the weight of the atomic bomb, as it wasn't mentioned in the document, even though the United States already had it. Could that warning of immediate and utter destruction be a veiled reference to the fact that they already had the bomb? Maybe, but it was open to interpretation. And in any case, the declaration also called for Japan's unconditional surrender, which was unacceptable to the honor code of the High Command of the Japanese military. Secret diplomacy and the Mokusatsu misunderstanding. Many historians agree that Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo played a key role in how events unfolded. Togo hoped that the Soviet Union, which wasn't at war with Japan, would agree to help with peace talks between Japan and the Western Allies. This way, the Japanese could get better surrender terms, because the Potsdam Declaration left many things unclear. These included Japan's future government, what would happen to those accused of war crimes, who were promised stern justice, and most importantly, the emperor's status after surrender, which wasn't mentioned anywhere in the declaration. Instead, it read, "The authority and influence of those who have deceived and misled the people of Japan into embarking on world conquest must be eliminated forever." 2 weeks before the Potsdam Declaration, on July 12th, Togo had asked the Japanese ambassador in Moscow, Naotake Sato, to tell the Soviets, on behalf of the emperor, that Japan had no choice but to fight the war to the very end with a total war effort if the United States and the United Kingdom demanded unconditional surrender. Since Stalin, even though he was at the Potsdam Conference, refused to sign the declaration saying his country wasn't at war with Japan, this gave Togo hope that the Soviets would help as mediators. Meanwhile, the Allies had already cracked Japan's secret codes, including the one they used to send messages to their top diplomats. So the Americans knew about Japan's hopes for Stalin's help. So the foreign minister Togo met with Emperor Hirohito and told him to wait to answer the declaration until the Soviets responded to Japan's offer to help with peace talks. Years later, a foreign ministry official who was there said that the emperor stated without hesitation that the Potsdam Declaration seemed acceptable in principle. On July 28th, in response to the Potsdam Declaration, Prime Minister Suzuki used a word that has caused a lot of discussion: mokusatsu. This word can mean to ignore or to treat with silent contempt, but it could also mean to hold back from commenting. Since 1950, people have believed the myth that the United States decided to drop the atomic bombs because of a wrong translation of this word. But this doesn't hold up if you read the Prime Minister's full statement published in Japanese newspapers. The controversial phrase was translated into English by the Japanese Empire's own official news agency, Dome Press, as, "The Japanese government ignores this, and we are determined to continue our bitter fight to the end." The Americans knew there were big arguments happening among top Japanese officials, but they could only guess how much power the people who wanted to surrender really had. 9 days after Suzuki's reply, on August 6th, they bombed Hiroshima. After the terrible event, Truman gave a speech warning that Japan could expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on Earth. Suzuki again told the Japanese press that the government planned to keep fighting. Some of you might be wondering why the Japanese people didn't rebel against their leaders. The main point was something else. In reality, the Japanese people had no idea what was going on. All news, all information was strictly censored by the government. When the bomb exploded in Hiroshima, only the people nearby knew something terrible had happened. But they didn't even really understand what it was. The Potsdam Declaration was translated in Japan with big cuts, like leaving out the threat of immediate and total destruction. Even though American bombers dropped over 3 million leaflets with the declaration over Japan, it's unlikely that a large number of people read it. Reading enemy propaganda or listening to foreign radio stations was a crime and punished severely. The Japanese government's last hope disappeared on August 8th, when Stalin declared war on Japan and joined the Potsdam Declaration. The next day, the second atomic bomb fell, this time on Nagasaki. 40,000 people died instantly. Just a few hours before, the Soviets had started Operation August Storm, their invasion of Manchukuo, the puppet state set up by the Japanese. Japan's exhaustion and the doctrine of total sacrifice. From a military and supply standpoint, Japan was completely worn out by August 1945. Its wartime economy had fallen apart, its merchant ships were mostly gone, and its battle fleet was practically wiped out. The country was really struggling with not enough food and fuel. In the capital city of Tokyo, there were barely 10,000 soldiers left who were fit to fight. Even though things were looking really bad, the Imperial General Headquarters still planned to fight until the very end. They had come up with Operation Ketsugo, which was a plan to defend all of the Japanese islands. This plan was based on the idea of sacrificing 100 million Japanese in a brave effort so that the enemy, seeing the terrible human cost, would lose the will to keep fighting. Civilian groups were being formed and people were being trained with simple weapons like sticks and spears. Meanwhile, the Allies were also working on their own invasion plans, which were split into two parts. Operation Olympic, to invade the island of Kyushu in November 1945, and Operation Coronet, to invade the island of Honshu in the spring of 1946. The numbers for how many people would get hurt or die were truly shocking. It was thought that the Olympic invasion could lead to between 50,000 and 400,000 American casualties, while Japanese casualties, both military and civilian, could be in the millions. These plans and the predicted casualties really supported the idea that using the atomic bomb was the only way to avoid even more bloodshed. Geopolitical interests and the Emperor's decision. Beyond the argument of saving American lives, some historians suggest that President Truman may have had another reason to speed up Japan's surrender, to avoid further expansion of Soviet influence in Asia. The Soviet Union's quick entry into the war against Japan on August 8th and its later agreement to the Potsdam Declaration was a clear sign of Stalin's interest in the region. A quick end to the war brought about by the atomic bombs could have limited the Soviet Union's land and political gains. Also, the atomic bombing also served as a strong argument for the more undecided Japanese leaders. Even though the military group kept holding on to the idea of fighting to the very end, the huge destruction in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, along with the Soviet entry into the war, made the position of those who wanted to surrender stronger. It was Emperor Hirohito himself, in his surrender speech, who mentioned the use of a new and very cruel bomb as the deciding factor to end the war. His involvement was key to overcoming the military's resistance and getting them to accept the surrender. Beyond Hiroshima and Nagasaki, how many more bombs? Another important point to think about is how many more atomic bombs the United States had, or how many they could make quickly. Some historians suggest that the rush to drop the 2 bombs on Japan wasn't just about getting them to surrender right away, but also to show America's ability to make and use many nuclear weapons. The chance that the United States had a much bigger supply and was willing to use it again and again might have been a big pressure point for the Japanese leaders. There has been talk that, besides the 2 bombs used, other bombs were ready to be used if Japan didn't surrender quickly. The choice of targets, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, has also been a topic of discussion. Both cities were important military and industrial centers, but they were not among the Japanese cities most destroyed by earlier regular bombings. This allowed for a clear showing of the atomic bomb's unique destructive power. Cities that hadn't been completely leveled were chosen so that the bomb's effect would be clear and its psychological impact would be as big as possible. It's known that Tokyo, even though it was the capital and a crowded city, was not chosen as a target because of fears of the chaos that would happen, and the long-lasting anger that a direct attack on the center of imperial power could cause. Kyoto, another city thought about as a target because of its size and cultural value, was taken off the list because of strong opposition from Secretary of War Henry Stimson, who had visited the city and was worried about the bad feelings such destruction could cause in the future. So Nagasaki, even though it wasn't the main target at first, which was Kokura, but it was covered by clouds, became the second target in just a few days. Atomic bombs versus conventional fire, a final look. Finally, it's important to put the atomic bombings into the context of the already existing harshness of the war. It is argued that regular bombings of civilians were already a common and terrible practice. In fact, Operation Meeting House, the firebombing of Tokyo between March 9th and 10th, 1945, caused more destruction and deaths than the individual atomic bombings. During that fateful night, 300 B-29 bombers dropped 1,700 tons of M69 napalm on Tokyo, starting a firestorm that reached temperatures of almost 1,000 degrees Celsius and destroyed more than 40 square kilometers, about a quarter of the city. It's estimated that more than 100,000 people died, a number close to the total deaths in Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the days of the explosions. This leads to a key question. If all that destruction and fiery horror couldn't make Japan surrender, why was it believed that a couple of atomic bombs would? It's possible that, as already mentioned, it wasn't just 1 or 2 atomic bombs that convinced Japanese leaders to surrender, but the fear that the Americans had many more ready. The idea of an endless supply of weapons and a strong will to use them might have been the deciding factor. The question of whether the atomic bombings were truly necessary to end World War II is still a topic of intense debate. Arguments range from saving Allied and Japanese lives to showing power in the rising Cold War and the Soviet Union's upcoming entry into the conflict. And so, our journey through one of modern history's most debated moments comes to an end. The choice to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, an event that forever changed how wars are fought and how countries interact, continues to spark deep discussion. Were they really the unavoidable end of a terrible conflict, or a show of power with much bigger effects? The facts, intentions, and results are all woven together in a complex picture that makes us think. If you found this analysis interesting, if it made you think, or if you have your own thoughts on this very important topic, please leave your opinion in the comments. What do you think would have happened if the bombs hadn't been dropped? Were there other choices? We want to hear from you. And if you like this style and want to keep exploring complex historical topics with us, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss our next stories. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into history. See you in the next amazing story.